town of Black Hollow had always been steeped in whispers of the macabre. Hidden deep within a forest of twisted skeletal trees, it was a place where fog clung like cobwebs and the sun rarely broke through. Its most notorious feature or curse was Ashbourne Manor, an imposing Victorian house that loomed over the town like a harbinger of doom. No one dared venture near it, not since the mysterious disappearance of the Ashbourne family decades ago. Lila Morgan was a newcomer to Black Hollow, a journalist by profession and a skeptic at heart. She lived for exposing the truth behind urban legends. When she first heard of Ashbourne Manor, she couldn't resist the challenge. With a flashlight, her camera, and an unshakable sense of courage, she set out toward the crumbling house one stormy evening, the wind howling around her like a lost soul. The manor's gate groaned open with a long, shuddering sound. The air inside felt colder, thicker, as if the property held secrets it refused to release. The ivy-covered walls seemed to twist in the flickering beam of her flashlight. The door, unexpectedly unlocked, creaked open with an unwilling groan. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. The grand staircase twisted into shadow, and the faint drip of water echoed through the empty halls. Lila began taking pictures, her heartbeat quickening in her chest. She muttered to herself, dismissing the legends as exaggerated. It was just an old house. Then she heard it a whisper, soft, unintelligible, and far too close for comfort. She froze, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. The whispering stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. She chalked it up to the wind and moved deeper into the house. The living room was a snapshot of another era, a dusty piano, decayed furniture, and a grand chandelier hanging precariously. On the mantel above the fireplace stood a row of photographs, their subjects' faces scratched out. One frame stood empty, its glass cracked. She leaned in to inspect it, and that's when the air shifted. The shadow moved in the corner of her eye. She spun around, her flashlight trembling. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice breaking. The silence answered her, thick and heavy. She backed away, her heel catching on the frayed edge of a carpet. She stumbled, her flashlight rolling out of her hand and casting erratic beams across the room. As she scrambled to retrieve it, she saw the figure, a tall, gaunt silhouette with hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It stood at the edge of the room, unmoving. Lila froze, every instinct screaming for her to run, but her body refused to obey. The figure tilted its head as if studying her before stepping closer, its movements unnaturally smooth. Lila found her voice and screamed, charging toward the door. The house seemed to fight back, its walls groaned, the floorboards buckled under her weight, and the door slammed shut just as she reached it. She pounded on it in a frenzy, but the wood felt alive, pulsing ominously beneath her fists. Behind her, the whispering returned, louder now, a chorus of voices in a language she couldn't understand. She spun around, tears streaming down her face. The figure had moved closer, its hollow eyes boring into her soul. The last thing Lila saw was its outstretched hand, cold and unyielding, as it pressed against her forehead. Then, everything went black. Days later, a search party discovered Lila's camera outside the manor. The photos revealed eerie glimpses of the house's interior, its shadowy corners, and finally, the figure with hollow eyes standing just inches from the lens. The last image was a blurry close-up of Lila's terrified face, frozen in a silent scream. In 2015, I moved into an old townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, hoping for a fresh start after a messy divorce. The house, with its creaky floors and faded wallpaper, had a certain charm that drew me in. The neighbors were friendly, but they often spoke of the house's strange history. "It's been here for years," one said, "but no one stays long." I laughed it off, thinking they were just trying to scare me. The first few days were peaceful. I unpacked, set up my things, and settled into a new routine. But soon I began noticing strange occurrences. Objects would be just slightly out of place, my coffee cup moved an inch, my keys were always somewhere different. The air felt heavy, as if something unseen was constantly watching. At night I'd hear soft footsteps in the hall, despite being alone in the house. One evening as I read in bed, I heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable. I froze. It wasn't the wind, and it didn't sound like anything from the neighbors. The voice was low, almost pleading, "Leave, before it's too late." I dismissed it as my imagination, but the next night, the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing through the house. "You're not alone. It knows you're here." The feeling of being watched grew unbearable. The house seemed to breathe along with me, its creaks and groans echoing like a heartbeat. Desperate for answers, I began researching the house's history, combing through old records and speaking with the neighbors. What I uncovered chilled me to the core. The house had been linked to a series of disappearances in the 1970s. Several residents had vanished without a trace, and none of them had ever been found. Determined to get answers, I spent the night in the basement, hoping to uncover the source of the strange occurrences. As I sat in the dark, the whispers grew louder. "You shouldn't have stayed." The temperature dropped, and I saw a shadow flicker across the room. I turned, but there was no one there. The shadow closed in, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. The last thing I remember is the whisper, "Now you're mine." The next morning, the house was empty. No sign of me remained, just the whispers lingering in the air, waiting for the next tenant to discover its dark secrets. The door to Elliott House groaned as it opened, the sound reverberating through the empty forest. Claire stepped inside, flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. She had been warned to stay away, but the pull of uncovering the mansion's secrets was too strong. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the cursed family that once lived there, their voices filled with dread. They were never seen again, they whispered. Elliott House claimed them. The air was stifling, thick with dust and a cold that felt unnatural. The walls were draped in faded, peeling wallpaper, and the floor creaked beneath Claire's careful steps. In the center of the grand hall stood a decaying staircase, its banister tangled in cobwebs like macabre adornments. Above it hung a large portrait of a stern-faced man with hollow eyes. His gaze followed Claire, no matter where she moved. A wave of unease washed over Claire, as if the house itself were watching her every move. She pushed the feeling aside and pressed on. In a side room, she spotted a journal resting on a table. The cover was worn and cracked, but the words inside were still clear, scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. "We are trapped. The house won't let us leave. Every time we try, it shifts. The doors lead nowhere. The windows reveal only endless black. The whispers, oh, the whispers, they come at night, telling us to stay. I fear they will soon make us a part of this place." As she read, Claire heard a faint noise, like a whisper carried on a gust of wind. She froze, straining her ears. The sound grew louder, more distinct, a cacophony of voices overlapping, murmuring her name. Her pulse quickened as she turned toward the hallway. A shadow flickered at the edge of her flashlight beam. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. There was no response, only the whispers intensifying, wrapping around her like invisible tendrils. She stumbled backward, her flashlight shaking. Suddenly, the door she had entered through slammed shut with a deafening bang. Claire ran back to the main hall, only to find the staircase now spiraling endlessly upward, disappearing into darkness. Her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into a suffocating void. The whispers grew louder, now forming words. "Stay. Forever." Desperation overtook Claire as she frantically clawed at the walls, searching for a way out. Her hands brushed something warm and sticky, and a chill of horror shot through her as she realized it was blood. The walls seemed to pulse, alive with an unnatural rhythm, while the floor beneath her began to shift, soft and yielding like flesh. Claire collapsed, her mind crumbling under the unbearable weight of the impossible. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the man from the painting, his hollow eyes now staring down at her, his hand reaching out, cold and beckoning. The whispers ceased. Elliott House had claimed another,